On TikTok, where I am text files, there's always something interesting going by. And it doesn't just consist of the latest dances or trends and memes from the modern era. Sometimes it's discussions and interviews going back for subjects from decades before, even ones that I'm interested in. And occasionally, I'll even comment at the bottom of the video. So, an excerpt of an interview with the actor Dan Ackroyd had him describing his thoughts and feelings about his life with John Belushi, his partner for the first major part of his comedy career. And what struck me was how well he handled the question. If somebody asked you, "What did you think about your friend who died so many years ago of a drug overdose?" you might not want to talk about it in detail. But now at his age, Dan Ackroyd had a really good set of answers ready to go about his friend and how talented he was and how gifted he was and able to really inspire Dan Ackroyd to go to new heights, about how he was really sad about losing him. And he had a tone of forgiveness for everybody, for John Belushi, for the person who gave him his overdose, and how he was a warning to the rest of the community that he was part of, that they needed to get away from drugs as being a central part of their lives. My comment was pretty simple. I just said that I was really proud of how Mr. Ackroyd had really come along in processing his friend's death. And to be frank, that's about all I did. Leave a comment, move on to other TikToks. But a few months later, Dan Ackroyd contacted me, thanked me for the message. And while I wasn't sure how to take that, it did lead me to a very interesting journey and realization. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Jeff Atwood and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Now, when somebody who claims to be Dan Ackroyd contacts you, even with a thank you, you do the normal things. You look at the account, you look at how they've been posting, you look for what do they have that proves or disproves that this is the person. I did that. The account said that it was the only account of Dan Ackroyd. It mentioned how to buy his liquor, and it had just 2 videos, even though it had been around for 2 years, both of them advertising products that I know he sells. In other words, let's put it at a maybe. Probably not a no, probably not a definite yes. And I put it there and started talking to him. And he wrote like a person who doesn't really want to be doing TikToks. He basically thanked me for saying such a kind thing, and I said I wanted to take the opportunity, if this was the real Mr. Ackroyd, just to thank him for years of how he's both made me laugh and inspired me with how he looks into the unknown, references the paranormal, and inspires not just with his creativity, but with his outlook and general kindness. And he thanked me for that. And the thank you was a very clipped thank you. It wasn't paragraph over paragraph. It wasn't him talking at me. It was him talking with me. This started to make me feel like I was talking to the real deal. Each time I talked to him, there may have been a day or two in between each transaction. Now, did I go running to everybody and say that Dan Ackroyd looked at me, talked to me, was giving me DMs on TikTok? Well, no. I was happy that here was this celebrity talking to me possibly, but I also understood it didn't mean that I was particularly special. If a person is a celebrity, they're just a person as well, and they may choose to talk to you, and their busy life may take them away. While talking to me, I mentioned that I was in the New York area, and perhaps if he was ever in the New York area, we could go out for dinner. He said, well, maybe that could happen. And I left it at that. For the next month and a half, Dan Ackroyd would message me and just say hello, and I'd say hello back. He would occasionally tell me that he was going to be in New York at some point doing a small shoot for a movie, and I said, great. The offer is always open, and I'm happy to do the driving. Now, I knew there was a bunch of things involved. If you're an actor acting on a professional movie set, your time isn't your own. Your people may tell you that you have to be here for a short interview, or you have to meet for some business discussions, or so on. I treated him like I would any business person who is a millionaire, whose time has to be parceled out. And if opportunity presented itself, it might be kind of nice to have dinner with him. And let's get back here now. This may have been Dan Ackroyd. This may not have been Dan Ackroyd. It wasn't really clear what was going on. The way he talked was the clipped style of an older man using a phone he didn't particularly like using. My conversations with him were non-committal, happy to tell him that his work inspired me, and talking a little bit about what I do, but leaving it at that. There's a philosophy that many celebrities are just people with a job, and the job puts them into various positions, and it just happens to be they've lost a lot of privacy in the process. I've talked before about how massive celebrity can lead you to a life that is not very enjoyable at all, and all the money and all the huge homes and all the jet-setting and delicious dinners don't make up for that. So I kept it casual. If it was anybody, I would keep it casual. I've met other people who I think of as celebrities of a different sort, and I have really enjoyed keeping it casual, not falling over each other, not being weird or making it weird. A lot of them are people that are celebrities to me, people who have created world-class software that many people remember and use, or people who founded companies that I thought were really world-changing after a fashion. A good example of this sort of celebrity was meeting Michael Robinson of MP3.com in the mid-2000s. Just talking to him at a booth. It was nothing major for either of us, but it was a nice moment, and me thanking him for being so bold around MP3s at a time when it was looking like they were going to be in some way banned. Mr. Ackroyd, I thought, may have time for me, may be able to stop by, may be able to encourage me to meet him at an event, but he might not. In this period of Schrodinger's Ackroyd, where I wasn't sure if he was real or not, and I wasn't doing anything that was either putting me at risk or avoiding doing something because of it, it was nice to know it was out there. There was Dan Ackroyd, there was me. And I really do like Dan Ackroyd. I like the things that I have seen about the actor and the things he says and the way he approaches the world, the kind of odd comedy he did in his 20s, the stories of how he would finish at Saturday Night Live and drive to the Canadian border to a diner that he liked and just greet the sunrise after being on national television by eating a delicious breakfast. I liked the flavor and the sense of how Dan Ackroyd seemed to be living his life. So the day came that he said he was going to be in New York, and I said I was ready to meet him. I could make some considerations to get where he was, and I suggested that if we did get a dinner, we could get it at Veselka, which is a Ukrainian diner in the East Village, which I recommend to everyone when you're in New York City. And he said that might be great. For a day or two, he went into radio silence, and then he apologized and said he didn't have TikTok on his work phone. And somewhere in there, I made a reference that I was happy to pay for dinner. And I guess that's where the wires crossed, because he started to discuss borrowing money for checks. In other words, he clicked onto the script because he was not Dan Ackroyd. He was somebody who was playing a rather long game with me, literal months of conversations with me, long-term, spanning weeks and weeks and sometimes days between transactions. It felt not like a person in some other country who was giving me a scripted way to get money out of me, but a busy person who was working on things, who had an account that looked in every way like it might be his. It was, in other words, just enough of one thing to fool me, but it wasn't enough. Now, there was no situation where I was going to lend Dan Ackroyd any money, and as soon as he started using those words, I stopped talking entirely. So I'm sure whoever was running that account walked away, figured out that the cover was blown, the grift was over, and wasn't going to work. And we could leave it at that. We could say, well, Jason, you almost got taken, but you didn't, and I can't believe you thought that was Dan Ackroyd for that long. But I'll tell you, the reason I thought it was Dan Ackroyd, and the reason I bought in and was willing to give it a shot to see if it was because of how lucky I've been. How many moments I've had in my life, both with my documentary films and in other events, where I've met all sorts of people from all different walks, and people who were images on my television or memories from when I read books about them, who I have met, who are the real people. And I've enjoyed them. I've enjoyed those moments with them. Attending one event where I didn't want to listen to the speaker, I went out into the lobby, and there was the amazing Randi, James Randi, the debunker of psychics and the magician, who was a beautiful writer, who was a wonderful skeptic, who was making it his own crusade to push through and pierce the veil of psychics claiming to have powers that they didn't. And we had a lovely 35-minute conversation in that lobby, during which, while he was talking about the different perceptions we have, and we were discussing how history even gets malleable for the people who are living it, he pulled a flower out from my ear. To have had that precious moment wipes out any amount of disappointment I have, keeping the light on, keeping an open mind, as I run into people who may or may not be who they say, but who, in the aggregate, serve at least as talismans of me recognizing that some of the greatest parts of how I've lived have come from others that I have admired deeply, whether I meet them or if I never actually do. And with almost no exception, I'm probably not going to lend them any money. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, thanks to James Bigkoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Joey Monk, Martin, Symbionts, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. On the flip side, I have had cases where somebody doesn't believe that I am Jason Scott. Those are great times. And for the people who do figure out that it's me, and who are incredibly happy that they've met somebody who is part of their online life, I really do, to treat all of them with patience, respect, and an acknowledgement that my so-called fame is only something that people can choose to give me, and it's not necessarily something I've earned.